Hi, everyone. Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's Xtalks webinar. Today's talk is entitled EU MDR, Best Practices for UDI Data and Product Labeling. My name is Sumaya and I'll be your Xtalks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes with time for a question and answer session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please also note that this event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank ReadTech and PRISYM ID who helped develop the content for this presentation. ReadTech is a provider of best-in-class data management, conversion, information, and analytics solutions to the life sciences industry, government agencies, patent-driven companies, and law firms. Their solutions offer the means for their customers to increase productivity, comply with regulations, and make more informed decisions quickly. Their offerings enable the collection, transformation, submission, and analysis of data. PRISYM ID designs and delivers label management software for organizations that need complete product auto-identification and lifecycle traceability. With the continual tightening of labeling regulations and audits, PRISYM ID empowers its clients to safeguard their reputation by ensuring compliance, removing risk, and significantly reduce costs by eliminating results through labeling errors. PRISYM ID is a market leader in providing validatable world-class label lifecycle management and is trusted for delivering personalized service excellence to clients. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Our first speaker is Gary Sainer. Gary Sainer is a subject matter expert on medical device unique device identification and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He has over 30 years of experience in the areas of software development, process management, and data administration, with the last 15 years focused on the life sciences industry. With an understanding of regulations, business requirements, and systems, he has helped shape and implement solutions at ReadTech for data management, validation, and processing of drug labeling and medical device UDI content. Our second speaker is Richard Castle. Having spent most of his career working with the print sector and enterprise labeling software, Richard Castle is always keen to learn about the regulatory labeling changes the industry faces, like EU MDR, and to share his gained knowledge. Richard is aware of the complex selection process for labeling solutions that customers experience, and he has a proven ability to align the requirements to solutions that are not only valid for today, but aligned to any future impact of regulatory changes. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the presentation to our first speakers. So Gary, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, thank you, Samara. I believe the title screen is now up on the screen. We apologize for the technical difficulties getting started off here, but we would like to concentrate our talk today on European Union MDR best practices for UDI data and product labeling. We have a pretty full agenda. Would like to go through a couple topics. There's the title for myself and Richard. We've already covered that. So let's get on to the agenda. 4 major areas. Focus in on the EU MDR timing. Then we'll move over to device registration UDI data reporting. Thirdly, cover some details on product labeling to make sure it's in conformance to the EU MDR. And then the fourth segment of this presentation will include some question and answers from the audience. There is a chat panel that you can set questions to. All right, well, let's get started with the timing. I do believe that most of those in the audience have exposure to UDI, so we won't be covering the real basics, but I'll go over some slides rather quickly and leave those for homework. If you are new to UDI, then please dive into those a little bit deeper, or contact Richard or myself for additional information. But as to the timing, we first need to understand what MDR is all about, and it's that regulatory reform that takes currently 3 medical device directives and merges them and creates 2 new regulations. Noteworthy is that they are binding across all EU member states. The directives had varying implementations based on accommodations that are available through directives. So you see a lot of different guidances and practices as you go from member state to member state. So the good news is the regulations are uniform. The bad news is the regulations pretty much cleared the deck, rewrote the rules, and established a lot of new activities. There's lots of guidance and conformance that needs to be considered in the regulations. We're going to focus in very precisely on UDI data that needs to be reported, and the product identification that is captured in UDI that needs to go onto the label itself. And there's a number of other changes there. So we feel for you. There's a lot of changes there, but we'll try to focus our discussion today. If you had any exposure to timing regulations, you'll notice these 3 major events, the coming into the force of the MDR and IVDR in 2017, and the date of application, May 2020, and the date of application for the IVDR, the in vitro diagnostic regulation, 2 years later. Originally, that UDIMED launch was to be in concert with the date of application with MDR. Now it's shoved back 2 years, so there's a 2-year delay. And we're sitting just 3 months away. It really comes down to like 96 days. So I remember when it was, the date of application was 3 years after the entry of force, and now, lo and behold, we're very close on that edge, and a lot of activity, a lot of things come into play. So we'll try to summarize that for you and clear the air. The European Commission released this delay notice back in October, and as mentioned, moved the UDIMED launch. But in the same announcement, they also mentioned that the MDR date of application would be changed. And that has 2 very significant impacts to you as manufacturers. Regulations that are independent of the reporting to UDIMED are not delayed. So all those activities related to Class 1 self-certification for new MDR products, and those that you'd like to conduct after the date of application, all are still in force, and you should be well on your way with engaging notified bodies for some of your other classes. That is not at all delayed. The other impact is that the reporting is not canceled. There was wording in the regulation that indicates that in the event there is a delay, those particular activities should be conducted under the corresponding medical device directive and active implantable medical device directive procedures. So what you have been doing for the number of years at the member state level still is in play. Your economic operator registration, basically registering your establishment, your device registration, serious incident reporting, and so on, is still to be performed as it was before the date of application, but now it's continued because there's no provision inside UDIMED to accept that information. We here at RETAC have been continually engaging with the test environment. So I don't know, I think it's over 2,500 or so particular records have been submitted. And we noticed that the European Commission did not really change their development plan. They kept the same activity in place, and they're still moving forward on the development and testing. We would hope that they would open that up to other parties. that would be able to do testing into the UDIMED playground environment. The other noteworthy event was back in December, early December, there was an announcement that the UDIMED Actor module would be open as of May 2020 for voluntary economic operator registration. So that was quite a surprise, and it does allow for manufacturers to, well, we hope that it allows manufacturers to register and then also gain a single registration number, an SRN number. So that's used throughout your various documentations and technical documents. But this would be great news if that just one module inside UDIMED would be available. We need to stay tuned and see the details as they come up. When you look at the MDR and in vitro diagnostic regulation, you'll need to divide your particular conversation into three different categories. The first one being those products that you do not plan to continue after the date of application. Basically, they become discontinued. In the event those units out in the field do have a serious incident, they would eventually need to be reported into UDIMED. So there's a little bit of encounter with UDIMED in the future with a serious incident. They would have to be registered at that point in time. Other than that, these discontinued devices have no connection with UDIMED. The second major, and this is by far the largest category of activity, those legacy directives currently on the market and will be continued. There's some criteria that the certificate is still valid and it doesn't have significant change, a couple other items. But if you're into that particular criteria and able to meet all those, you're able to still market those and place them onto the marketplace. And we'll look at a detailed timeline here in a second. And the third category of devices that are those that are new to the marketplace, you're placing them on the market for the first time and would need to comply with MDR and so on. Or it might be one of those legacy devices where the certificate had expired. And now there's a cutover where that particular device then would need to go through MDR compliance and before it's continued to be placed on the market. We're going to do a quick review of the timeline, and I'll mention right up front, the slide gets a little bit busy, but bear with me. We have the timeline down there on the bottom. The UDIMED launch was shifted 2 years later, and now we have legacy medical devices. So again, if you meet the criteria, a valid certificate and so on, there's a 4-year window where you can continue to place those particular products on the market. That's followed by a 1-year sell-off where those products that are in the logistics chain, maybe they're in warehousing and so on, they can still be placed into service for 1 additional year. The registration of all those legacy products need to occur during 18 months, originally in May of 2020, but now 2 years later. The next class of details here is on those MDR medical devices. So these comply to the regulation themselves. They can be placed on the market, assuming they meet all the criteria and gain certification and so on. There are 3 timelines for placing UDI on the labels, starting off with Class 3, 2A, B, and then Class 1. 1, 3, and 5 years after the date of application. So that actually comes on rather quickly for the Class 1. And then there's a subset of those products that fall into the reusable category and would have to have UDI directly placed on the product, and they are staggered 2 years after the UDI placed on the label. These products, again, were originally registered to be registered on the date of application in MDR. Now it's the IVDR date of application timing when UDIMED is launched. Now, I'd love to be able to say that this is now done, but we have a whole second conversation for the in vitro diagnostics. You see that they're being able to be placed on the market. They have a 2-year window. Those legacy IVDs are able to be continually placed, again, valid certificate and so on, meeting all the criteria, and a 1-year sell-off. That registration has not changed. It was originally in line with the date of application for IVDR. And lastly, the IVDR devices, they can be placed on the market. Actually, you can gain approval a little bit early, but for the most part, after the date of application, they will need to have UDI placed on their labels, again, in a 1, 3, and 5 year scheduled timeline based on the particular class, whether it's A, B, C, or D. And the registration is, again, an 18-month window and then thereafter. So noteworthy is that all these registrations of all 4 of those classes that we just talked about are now in sync, starting with the UDIMED launch on May 26, 2022, 18 months later, out to November 26, 2023. We'll leave this slide for homework. Basically charts some of the information we just covered. You can print it off, put it under your pillow, and hopefully meet all those dates. Hopefully it won't be a problem for you. All right, so now we understand some of the timing. Let's move over to some of the requirements that are related to UDI device registration data reporting. I'll quickly flow through this particular definition for UDI. I assume all of those in the audience are very familiar with the UDI. First portion is this device identifier. It's mandatory. It identifies the labor in a particular version or model of a device. A second component is conditional, based on whether or not there's various controls on the product label, and if so, then it needs to be included in the UDI. So you might have manufacturing date, expiration date, lot or batch, serial number. The EU does identify a software as a device, version number to be included. They don't make a use of the DIN number, such as the FDA. I'm using GS1 just for illustration purposes here, not an endorsement necessarily, but they do certainly represent the largest use in the industry. But that UDI then is simply the device identifier and the production identifier, whether it's 0 or any combination of those controls up to all of them. And an example might be as shown here with a pretty long string of numbers, but there's some coding and some formatting rules that need to apply. Let's move over to the regulation. What has the regulation specified as far as requirements for UDI? And this looks very similar to those that have seen the FDA requirements, putting UDI on the product device label and packaging in a human readable and automatic ID. Typically that's implemented as a 1-dimensional or a 2-dimensional barcode. Subset of those products, again, those reusables, need that direct marking. There's a reporting of the UDI information to a database, UDIMED. A lot of data elements that need to be reported. We'll take a look at that. And there is additional reporting that is required. So the annual reports, this isn't a full list, but post-marketing surveillance. And then noteworthy, the UDI does need to be included on a patient implant card. So that product information flows out by way of the product on the label, in some cases actually on the physical product itself, directly marked. And in some cases, the information is in that implant card. The information in parallel is reported to the regulatory body, in this case, European Commission, taking that particular data and storing it into UDIMED. all publicly available. A couple fields that are redacted. Okay, so one of the first requirements there was to place UDI on a product label, and Richard will definitely get into this a little bit deeper, but you see a barcode there with text underneath it, and as necessary, the production identifier is concatenated to the device identifier. One of the other aspects was reporting data. So there is a data dictionary available from the European Commission. It comes out in the spreadsheet. It has a number of fields identified. Noteworthy, and which is different than the FDA list, it has a two-part tiered data collection. One set of attributes that we see here are assigned to a family group referred to as a basic UDI or buddy, as the nickname is, commonly used. About 36 fields are common across this family at the buddy level. And then those devices that are in the family have a number of additional attributes, well over 66 in this case. You'll find that this is much more detailed than what the FDA has done. The grand total here for Europe is well over 100. The FDA only collected 64 data attributes. So this is a daunting task to work your way through all of these data elements that would need to be associated with each medical device. There are dedicated data sets for system and procedure packs. And again, it's two-tier structure. So on the left, we see the basic UDI for a procedure pack, some elements there, and then for each pack, another set of data elements. So this is another little bit of a twist. The FDA did not have any such variation for different data sets, nor did they have the two-tier structure. So this does become another learning curve to work with. If you remember, one of the other requirements on that set of regulations for UDI was to submit the data to UDIMED. So this is a generic diagram of submitting data to a health authority. Most of them that we have encountered do have a web interface. So one of your options is to do manual entry. Go to the web interface and manually enter the data. I will also mention that UDIMED does have plans to allow a operator to upload an XML file. So it would have to be created in some external tool, but it could be uploaded. It's not a spreadsheet. That is a very precisely authored XML file. And that could be uploaded into UDIMED on the right-hand side. Your other options are to build a system inside your particular firewall and develop that on your own, and then build XML files in this case and connect that up to UDIMED. Third option there is to buy a vendor's tool and install it inside your system on premises, go through validation and so on, and then again have that connection made. A third option, I commonly refer to this as the rent option, but basically it's a subscription to a third party, an external third party hosted piece of software as a solution, and that tool then builds the package and takes care of the protocol and the messaging to UDIMED. So all of these, well, the bottom three, I should say, make use of a data exchange that UDIMED has implemented and is connected to UDIMED and using something called AS4 technology. So that is something that would have actually been exercised in a sandbox environment, not the production environment as of yet. So there's some options there. And now, Samara, I think if you would like to roll that first poll question, and we'll take a look at what the audience is thinking they might implement for a UDI submission solution.
Great, thank you so much, Gary. So yes, that does bring us to our first poll question. So audience members, you should be seeing that poll question on your screen. So that question is, which answer best describes your expected approach to submitting UDI data to regulatory authorities? So your options are not decided, or manual, enter data into regulatory web interface, or rent, upload your data to external third-party system, or buy, purchase third-party system and install on premises, or build. So that's use internal staff to develop an in-house system. So you can go ahead and just select one option there. And once again, that question is, which answer best describes your expected approach to submitting UDI data to regulatory authorities? So I do see that majority of audience members have voted, so I'll close the poll. And launch those results for you. So the results are as follows. So with 30% of the votes went to not decided. Sorry, that was 31 of votes went to manual, enter data into regulatory web interface. After that was not decided at 30%. After that, it was 21%, it was rent at 21%, and then followed by buy at 10%, and then last was build at 8%. So Gary, back to you.
All right, well, thank you very much. Those are interesting results and somewhat reminiscent of some of the other activities that, other polling that we've done in the past. So a lot of work to be done, a lot of decisions to be made, and setting up those systems. We're going to change the topic a little bit. And now that we kind of have a good feeling for what the requirements are for UDI, we're going to move over to some of the best practices. So in this particular section, I have included a representative plan, so a UDI implementation plan. Hopefully you're well along yours, but you can use it to kind of bounce and maybe tweak some things. And I also have 10 list items that you can be doing now. So even while UDIMED is being delayed, there's a number of things that can be done to keep the project moving forward and setting up the process. And then thirdly, there's, I think I have 5 best practices that we'll go over as a takeaway. So let's get started here. 5 steps for EU UDI implementation. Setting up their process, preparing your data, UDIMED UDI submission, all that needs to be in place, and then setting up and activating your labeling system, and then going into full operation. So there are some details under each one of those, and again, for time, I don't think I'll spend the time to go into each one of these sub-bullets, but you can take a look at these at your leisure on the downloaded content or in the recording. But basically, set the process up, know where you are, do your gap analysis, start to collect the data and collect it. Step 3 is that submission to UDIMED. Now, because of the delay, this is going to be an event that is pushed back in time, so a little bit out of sequence in this particular flow, but you'll be submitting later. And then setting up, preparing your labeling system. Make sure you have all those label designs in place, updates, test the labels, verify barcodes, and so on, and then move into full production, and then prepare for other international UDI implementations. So that's the quick plan. You might want to review those and bounce them off to see how they fit on your particular plan. There are a number of items in this checklist that you can be doing now. One is to get the guidance and expertise in place. which will help shape your data management strategy for UDI. One of those things is actually maybe participating in this particular webinar, so we'll give you half a check for that particular attendance. But then it's very important to do some training. So there's a lot of details surrounding the MDR, and as mentioned earlier, it basically rewrote the book, the regulatory book, and introduced UDI, which had no precedent in Europe in preceding. So there's a lot of policy statements and clauses in the MDR and IVDR. There's information about the data sets, and there's some sub-bullets here that describe the various variations on the data set. This is not simply a duplicate cookie cutter of what was done in the FDA. This is quite different, and many of those attributes are not the same as what the FDA collected. And then 2 check boxes at the bottom there. Start to collect the data with various tools and make sure the data is being cleansed. There's a number of business rules that are public from the European Commission, so you can start making sure that they are applied and that your data set does meet them, cleanse those particular errors, find omissions, and so on. I forgot to mention that there is some good information down in the appendix about the UDI policy. So when you receive the presentation, there's a number, like 5 or 6 pages just on the UDI policy, comparing it FDA to EU. Now, the next checkbox is this structured UDI repository. So you want to start managing and controlling your UDI values for business reasons, even before you need to submit them. So keeping track of your buddies, start collecting attributes, and then defining the children device identifiers that are inside that family. And you might find that this becomes a good way to start collecting that, make sure it's in a structured fashion rather than on someone's spreadsheet on their laptop somewhere. Then I would highly recommend that you start to do testing as early as possible and as necessary. So as you might have a vendor system involved in your solution, do some tests right away. So it may not actually be a submission to UNIMED, but you can make sure that it's implemented properly, make sure it's point to point, and in the event the European Commission does open up their testing phase, then certainly join in on that, and then keep an eye out to the global UDI activities. All right, so we'll move on quickly to the 5 best practices. These are some takeaways that you want to come back and maybe flesh out a little bit more in detail, review those. But we have seen over the course of time that it's good to make sure that you have control and governance over your data. And that includes policies, procedures, and so on. It is also highly recommended that you create a master data of attributes. Those values that are scattered about your enterprise right now need to be pulled together. Make sure that you have a single consistent source of truth. This data set has probably never been assembled, and there was no need for it to be pulled together before. So we have yet to see anyone that had all these attributes ready to go and to be submitted to a regulatory body. So it becomes an activity where you need to create that, establish it, and then maintain and monitor that data. So this is not a static piece of information. There are changes over the course of time. There's updates to existing products. There's new models and versions, and there's new products that come out. So keeping up to date on, or keeping that data fresh, and also keeping up to date on knowledge base. There's periodic changes from the downstream reporting agencies. So perhaps a data element is being added, or the business rule change here and there. The fourth of the 5 best practices would be to promote product UDI across your enterprise internally and also to your customers. There's a number of benefits in doing such. And then make sure you meet your goals. Stay compliant and satisfy your customers. So those are the 5 best practices. I'm going to quickly mention this, that you ought to have a global mindset where we have seen a number of regulatory bodies come on board. This second wave, Australia, China, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea, a couple of those are in pilot right now, accepting data. And pretty much everywhere you sell your product around the world, there's some discussion about UDI. Eventually, they will, or in the near future, adopt UDI standards. Won't go into this, but basically there are a number of timelines that are in the near future. 2020 is a very busy year. You know, we're in the middle of it here with the MDR date of application, and then Class 1 being September of this year for the FDA, and then a number of other countries and so on. Let's do a quick poll, Samara, for the audience to see what particular regions that they are submitting their products in.
Great, thank you so much, Gary, for that. So this brings us to our second poll question, and audience members, once again, you can see that question on your screens. So that question is, which countries present upcoming UDI challenges for you? So select all that may apply to you, so you can select more than one. So your options are USA, EU, China, Saudi Arabia, or South Korea. So once again, audience members, that question should be on your screens right now. So that question is, which countries present upcoming UDI challenges for you? So go ahead and select all that may apply for you. And your options are USA, EU, China, Saudi Arabia, or South Korea. And a quick reminder that you can continue sending in questions for our presenters as well. So it seems like the majority of audience members have voted, so I'll go ahead and close the poll for you. And then you can also see the results. So the results are as follows. So 90% of votes went to EU, followed by USA at 45%, and then it was China at 40%, and then Saudi Arabia at 36%, and then South Korea at 31%. So Gary, back to you.
All right, thank you, Samara. In consideration of the time, I'm going to close this section out. There's some further discussion about the landscape and putting together and putting in place a global single flexible master data management, and RETEC actually plays in that space as a vendor, sitting between you, the manufacturer, and your downstream regulatory and also customers, and being able to process that data, import it, validate it, and perform data management on that data set. And if you have questions there, we'll be glad to talk to you more. But at this time, what I would like to do is move it over to Richard, and I'll make you a presenter, Richard.
Thank you, Gary. I'm just waiting for it to come across.
All right, it should be ready.
Marvelous. Thank you very much, Gary. That was very in-depth and really good to listen into that. And sort of following on, let me just click through here onto the next screen for you. This is the agenda that I'm going to follow. Obviously, I'm aware of the time, so I will try and go through this as quickly as possible. But to pick up on some key bits that Gary was saying there, best practices and procedures. And I think that's what we're going to take away from this moving forward. That's what I'm going to try and target and show as we go through this presentation. So, our labels have to convey so much information now. MDR has just added another layer on top of MDD, and this new level of information and traceability that we're required to do It really is taking label responsibility into a whole other level. And what it's actually done is it's highlighted how far the humble label has now come as part of the business process. Originally, we wanted to manufacture a product, ship it, and sell it either to the end user or to a medical professional. Now that label has so much responsibility to do for us as a business. It has to comply messages, and it has to have traceability aspects of it as well. Also, what MDR has actually done has focused on the multiple personnel and departments that now have a stake in the product and the packaging labels, the IFUs, the EIFUs. The data that needs to be shown has to be 100% compliant. The risk of recalls due to labeling errors has been increased massively now. If you only have a few products, the task of managing this, could be done quite easily with maybe a little database, etc. But if you're looking at a global enterprise company with multiple products in multiple regions, with multiple languages and multiple packaging levels, it's a very complex task. And I'm sure, as all of you have gone through trying to find those labels that have been affected by EU MDR, there's been a lot of resource put into doing this. So, how many hours have you actually spent doing it? And as Gary highlighted at the end there, this is not the end. There are multiple other regulatory bodies coming on board. UDI is pushing out everywhere. There's going to be probably amendments and changes to annexes, both from the FDA and from within the EU. So you do not want to go through this process again. So I'm speaking from a software point of view and how we manage labels from a medical device environment for our clients and what we've learned through this pain process going on now. And I think a key bit was that one of the FDA speakers at last year's American Device Summit in Chicago actually said data is king. I know that's bandied around quite a lot, but that's actually true. When you're looking at it from an artwork and a labeling perspective, you can't store documents anymore. You can't have a locked PDF. It will not enable the business to have the flexibility to move from mass updates and to be able to search effective labels, because you're just looking for a document and you cannot see what's inside it. So data is the way forward now, and how we do all of this. Your label now, as we know, has to have all this information on it. It has to contain who you are, the manufacturer of the product, where it's been imported from, any risks and safety information, the symbology, which is again all has to be compliant, your information graphics, lot numbers used by dates, UDI, all this has to go on here as well. Not only that, it has to be recorded. You have to be able to audit this, bring it all back, and put it into your submissions forms as well. And as Gary said, there's now a two-tier structure. So there is so much going on the label now. It is absolutely phenomenal. So the bottom line is that you have to control every single piece of data. And I think the phrase was used, single source of truth. Don't like using that phrase, because in reality there are multiple sources of truth within the business, but somewhere has to sit in the middle of a spider's web and push back to SAP system, another database, etc. How many times have you and your businesses assumed that the data in your SAP or your MES or whatever solution is accurate, but actually a label designer or somebody else has changed something and it hasn't been fed backwards? A single source of truth is actually a way of aggregating that data and ensuring that it's accurate across your whole labeling portfolio. The label, it wasn't stated on MDD, but the labels are always supposed to expected to be clear and allow content to be human readable and to push things across. But we now have the addition of EIFUs, etc. So you've got to not only manage your data on your label, that data has then got to be consistent across all the technologies you're using and push back in a timely manner. So we have multiple areas of the business, all with an interest and a responsibility in the label. Its appearance, the legal statements that are on there, and changes and errors, as I said, are going to cause costly recalls. So by working with a single solution, and this is what we've found and what we've developed within it, in a transparent and collaborative way, each individual element, the data, so the logo, the infographics, the text, translations, etc. as well from the multi-language labels, all need to be stored and version controlled in an approved state once and once only. This will allow the business to use such tools as impact analysis and mass updates. It's going to speed this process up. It's going to drive best practice. It's also going to allow the business an opportunity to see where a change that's coming up, they can pre get ready. As we know, we've had a lot of issues trying to be ready for EU MDR. You can divide things up by regions and work in a global way. So here we can see how MDR has actually impacted on a label. The size of the space has changed because obviously more information has got to be carried, and all of this information that's on there now is actually governed. All of that information is completely governed. This is not just a label passing some information on. Everything here has to be reported on and has to be ensured it's up to date and the latest possible version. So if we just take one of the infographics on there, say the latex logo, should that change, from a business point of view, you need to be able to know exactly where that latex logo is used across your whole portfolio. It may only be in the EU or it may be changing in America, but you need to know exactly where that's used. By using a data approach and only storing that image once, and then if you imagine like a library, borrowing it out for all of your labels and your media messaging, you'll be able to trace and find out exactly where it was, and also you'll be able to update it in a quick manner. But that also leads on to something else. If we're looking at controlling data in this kind of way, and again, this goes back to best practice and giving the business confidence in what's being produced and what is out there in the market. If you store it in a data way, and I'm just going to run a short video here, and this is, it is one of our products, so I apologize for that. I'm just trying to highlight what you can do when you're using data. If you store data, you can build things such as a regulatory rules engine. So you could drive compliance across the business. You will know that who's ever designing a label anywhere across the globe is actually following a set of rules that your regulatory team has laid down. Here on this label here, as you can see at the moment, on the left-hand side, these are just some rules that we've built in. They're all green. That label has actually been built and it's hit the targets that we have decided here. But if your team have this, you then take away tribal knowledge. You speed time up in label creation, you speed approval times up, and you know that even if you were using third parties, because the idea of using a solution such as ours is that you can use third-party logins. You could have a distributor or a third-party manufacturer. They would only see you only grant them access to see the labels they require to do their job for your business. But you know that what they're doing is being done in a compliant way. And of course, the solution is then capturing all of that information and bringing it back. So for your audit trails, label reconciliation, etc., all of that is captured within the solution. So if we look here, we'll see that we've just deliberately removed a logo. Now, 5 years ago, someone could have created that label. That could have been missed. I know we have such things as 100, 200, and 300% human checks going on, but things do get missed. A person can be tired. A person can make a mistake. What we've got here is a piece of software telling you that it is wrong. In theory, it wouldn't let you, if you've programmed it the right way, and we've done it the way, to progress that label any further. And also as well, these are not just warnings on the side. These are hyperlinked to the correct piece of information stored centrally within the solution. So the person who's creating the label knows they are actually pulling the latest version controlled piece of information which is relevant to your EU MDR and placing it in. There's still a formatting error here because you can even then drill down further to say, no, that has to be a certain size. We have to show those infographics left to right in a certain order. So this, from a business point of view, is ensuring that compliance, driving that best practice, runs all the way across the business. So whether with the tribal knowledge and whether someone who's, say, working in Mexico cannot get hold of someone working in Paris, France, if the information has been stored centrally, the business can move and keep going forward. It also enables you to flex supply chains in a very quick and easy manner. So I'm going to forward on to that because I'm looking at the time and I'm fully aware that we are running low on time. Quickly touch on the UDI content that's going up through there. You will also as Gary has said, need to manage your UDI. Now, this might be with HIBIC or with GS1. You might be merging, your data and your packaging levels all together, but you need basically to have the records, the traceability to be able to pump this back, store it centrally, and pull it through. So again, by using a solution, I think everybody's now, whether they're inbuilt or whether they're bespoke like PRISYM ID, everybody's moving to a labeling solution along these lines. Everybody's at different levels, of course, we understand that, but by doing this, you can actually drive and store all of your UDI requirements. You'll be dealing with GS1 if you're buying your labels through that way, or HIBIC on the other way. And I'm just looking at the clock, and I know probably a lot of you will be calling off in 3 minutes. So I'm going to call this at a close now so we can get to any questions. So please keep dropping them in. And thank you for being on the call.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary and Richard, for that insightful presentation. So yes, that does bring us to our Q&A portion for today's webinar. And like Richard did mention that we did have that technical issue in the beginning. So what we'll do is that we'll extend today's Q&A by 10 minutes. I do understand that some may need to leave. However, do not worry. We will be sending you that recorded archive to everyone who attended, all the registrants, after today's webinar. So that should be about 2 days after today's webinar, so you can catch up later on. So let's go ahead and get the Q&A started as well. So the first question is, what are the implications now that the EU UDI is delayed until 2022?
So maybe I can jump in on that one. There are a number of things that apply in this interim 2-year period. The activities of economic registration, device registration, and reporting serious events need to follow the directive practices that were previously in place. So that is guidance that came right out of the regulation. There was actually a clause that envisioned that UDI might be delayed, and sure enough it was. So there is some activities that still need to be done for those particular devices. Even those MDR devices that are released under, or those devices that are released under the NDR, they have to follow some of the previous directive procedures as far as some of those reporting activities.
I can
if
agree with that,
further,
Gary.
It'll come back.
Yeah, we're finding that as well with the clients we're dealing with, our current client base. They're saying exactly what you've just said there, Gary. So even though the UDI is not actually functioning, it hasn't really changed what is expected to be delivered.
Yeah, and then one last quick comment on that. I think it's the Class 1 self-certified that comes into play here quite a bit. So many manufacturers would like to continue placing the Class 1 product on the marketplace, and it needs to go through that evaluation, that self-certification process, technical documents put in place, and so on. They're not submitted anywhere. They're held locally, internally, but they still need to go through that. A basic UDI DI needs to be assigned to that Class 1 product that's self-certified. A couple exceptions. Remember those measuring functions and Class 1 supply to sterile that would have a certificate, they fall under the legacy, so they enjoy the 4-year grace period. And there was some guidance that came out indicating that those reusable surgical devices, so the Class 1 Rs, are also given a 4-year grace period, so they don't need to comply immediately with the MDR. So long answer to a simple question. Maybe we can take the next one.
Great, thank you so much for that. Our next question is, do MDR products, so example Class 1 self-certified devices, need to comply with MDR label requirements as of May 2020, or are they applicable with UDI placement on the label, example May 2025 for Class 1?
I'll let Gary. Gary, do you want to take on that one? Because I'm hearing conflicting bits, but my information is coming from the user community. I don't know what you've actually heard direct, as it were.
Yeah, so I think the regulations indicate that it must comply with the labeling must comply with the regulations. So if you take the letter of the law, it would need to have some of those updates, such as the ones that Richard had gone through, the MD symbol and some of the other warnings and perhaps languages, and certainly it's very clear, by the way, that there is a exception for UDI. So that is explicitly carved out and mentioned in the regulation explicitly that it has that schedule of 1, 3 to 5 years afterwards based on the class. So a class 1 has until 2025 to have UDI on the label. Class 3s are much earlier in 2021. So that's my take on that, and we're actually kind of waiting to have anything explicitly coming out of the European Commission to help guide the industry on whether or not you need to implement all those other features in the UDI label in May of this year.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Gary. There has been little guidance on that at the moment. So I think this is why the industry is making their own decisions, waiting to be told. And because things have been changing month by month by month, that's kind of quite natural to understand how that's happened within the industry.
Have another one, Samara?
Yep, thank you so much for that. Our next question is, does a comparison exist between the US and EU UDI regulatory policy requirements?
Well, maybe I can jump on that one. The presentation materials, when you have access to those, I would recommend you go down to the appendix. I think we might have alluded to that earlier. There's about 5 or 6 slides that does a side-by-side comparison of the FDA rules and the EU rules. So it goes to various scenarios, class 1 retail, direct marking, what the production controls are, and so on. I think that will be a really good start of a side-by-side comparison of the policy.
Great, thank you so much, Gary. Our next question is, what are the MDR labeling requirements for software as a medical device?
You want to take that, Richard? I was aware that they do have a production control for the software version.
There is guidance around software, and it's not something that PRISYM ID has got involved in because it's not the kind of software we do. But from a medical device software, there is a whole paper on that, and obviously we can't. It's not something that we've got involved in because it doesn't touch what we do within the industry. But there is a whole paper on that I'm aware of. If someone would like to drop me an email, I will find that and get it across to them. If anybody has that specific question, please feel free to email me again with any other questions you may have around specifically the labeling area and the EIFUs. We will definitely have that, and of course Gary and I will liaise with each other and answer any questions that we can. And I will also go back to the wider team here. We have subject matter experts on different elements of the EU MDR that I can bring to the fore to help with that. But that's not one I can answer. If I answered you here and now, I wouldn't be giving you the right advice. So I'm going to stand back on that one.
Yeah, I do remember. I scanned through that section. There is one subtle difference. The FDA did allow the UDI on a package in the event that the product was physically distributed with like a CD and a package. The FDA did allow the package UDI to be different than the actual software that came up in the about screen in the software. That's not true, if I remember correctly, for the European Union. That UDI has to be the same and presented in a startup or about or a help screen. Or embedded somewhere in
accessible
to actual user, right? So
This is the bit. This
Go
is where
ahead.
we do need a specialist, because obviously there was some talk around the SaaS implications of medical device software, cloud-based, etc. And it is a bit of a minefield. So, I think there's going to be a specialist. I mean, I think we've got a couple here that have looked into it. But yes, if anybody would like to just drop us an email, we'll do our best to answer that question.
All right.
Great.
Do you have another one?
Yes, we do. So our next question is, how do the EU UDI data elements match up with US UDI data elements?
Well, we've done a pretty side-by-side comparison of the data elements, and we were hoping, along with industry, that there would be a much more of an alignment between fields that are able to be used in both regions. But we're finding that it's a woefully small list, unfortunately. A handful of fields are identified the same, and yet there's many, the majority are uniquely identified by European Union, so they're kind of unique to their particular data set. And it's not necessarily obvious. You might do a quick scan down through the list, and from the data element label or the description, it kind of looks the same, but when you get to the actual specifications of what flows into that field, you see some subtle differences in the definition. And then there's other fields that could potentially be the same. And a real simple example might be maybe a brand name is used in the US, and it could be the same in Europe, but maybe the business elected to use a different brand name. So in same fashion, a G10 technically can be used around the world for identification. And again, I'm using GS1 just as an example. But the product identifier, the device identifier, can be the same in both the US and EU market. But for business reasons, you might have different ones. So when we built accommodation for these data sets, we had to allow for the ones that are uniquely different, the ones that could be the same, but for business reasons, they could have a different dedicated value by region, and then the ones that are common. But we have not seen much more than a handful of the ones that are identical. So unfortunately, that's the news on that topic. Back to you, Samara.
Great, thank you so much, Gary. So I guess we ran out of time, and we do have a lot more questions. So what you can do, audience members, you can also send in more questions to Gary and Richard. So the email addresses that are showing on your screens, go ahead and quickly jot that down. So that's meddevice@readtech.com, and then info@prisymid.com. And because we also received some questions that we didn't get a chance to ask Gary and Richard about, not to worry about that as well. We will, I do know that the teams at ReadTech and PRISYM ID will be reaching out to you guys after today's webinar as well. And so thank you everyone for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. And also feel free to share this recorded archive with any colleagues or anyone that might be interested as well. And now please join us in thanking Gary Sainer and Richard Castle for that fantastic presentation. And we hope you found this conference informative. Take care. Bye-bye.